Hi, I'm Lindsay Penbrook. I'm on the board of directors with the New Haven Pride Center, and I'm non-binary. And welcome to our panel Beyond the Binary as part of Transgender Awareness Week. Before I introduce our panel, really quick, we wanted to give you a couple of definitions for context so that when people are talking about what their experience is, you'll have a little bit of knowledge to be able to use to go along with that. So real quick, everybody understands cisgender, which is just a person that identifies with the gender they were assigned at birth. And I think most people have knowledge of transgender, which is a person that does not fully identify with the gender that they were assigned at birth. For the ease of our conversation here, talking about non-binary, we may be referring to a binary transgender person versus a non-binary person. And that's all that we're talking about is in the case of a binary transgender person, they identify with being either specifically male or specifically female, right? So non-binary is a collection of identities, not just one identity, although there are people that identify that way. A collection of identities for people that don't identify with either binary gender. We have genders that lean toward one of the binary genders, like transmasculine or transfeminine or demiguy, demigirl. We have genders that vary, like gender fluid, which genders can fluctuate generally between male and female, or different percentages. We have bigender, where people experience two identities at the same time, multigender, polygender. Then we have genders that have a strong sense of gender, but not specifically male or female. It's kind of outside of the binary, and completely, outside of male and female. And that would be gender neutral. And then we have people that experience no gender or very limited feelings of gender, and people that identify as agender would fall on that end of the spectrum. So non-binary makes up a lot of different things, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. So without further ado, let me introduce the panel, starting with Chris Garaffa. Hey, Chris.
Hey, Lindsay. Great to be here.
Glad to have you. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. So my name is Chris. I use they, them pronouns. Identify as a non-binary trans feminine person. I live in New Haven and want to shout out the Pride Center for being such a great resource and putting all these events on. Little about me. I'm the former technology director at Trans Lifeline, which is a US and Canada resource for trans, non-binary, and questioning people. And I focus on technology and the intersections of privacy and civil rights. In terms of myself, and I'm sure we'll talk about this more, I came out, I'm in my mid-30s. I came out about a little over a year ago publicly, and, have been really navigating that path and that transition. So I'm really excited to talk more about that, and also talk about, and hear about the other panelists and where they are.
Well, thanks, Chris. Next, we're going to introduce Rey Herreza.
Hi, everyone. It's actually Rey Herreza. That's okay. I am a non-binary person. I use they, them pronouns. I am Filipinx, and I am an immigrant. I moved to the US when I was 12. Just a little bit about me, I guess. Most of my day is occupied with teaching and doing research and writing. I'm an academic. Specifically, I look at tech and the far right. And in terms of my, coming to terms with or sort of figuring out my non-binary identity, which is something that is continually unfolding and never ending. It's something that I realized, or I sort of came to in the last 2 years. And for a really long time, I didn't really think it was an option for me. So yeah, I'm really excited to talk about issues with regards to non-binary gender identities and hear all about the other panelists' experiences and perspectives.
Thanks, Rey. And finally, we're going to round our panel out with the miracle of the internet, Eric, all the way down in Texas.
Hi, how are you?
Hey, Eric. Glad to have you.
Thank you. So my name's Eric Edward Schell, and I use they, them pronouns. I am the founder and president of Pride Portraits, which is an LGBTQIA visibility campaign, bringing visibility through photography and written word. My own journey with being non-binary, I came out about a year ago, and it was very public because I was nominated for Grand Marshal in Houston, and they, needed to put me in a category. So they put me in the non-binary category because I had made this announcement on Facebook, and it was just out there. And I, had to learn quickly how to navigate spaces as public-facing non-binary person, which was a little scary, but quite honestly, I've always been this person. And from as little as I can remember, I was wanted to be in feminine clothing, and I used to walk on my tippy toes as just a little kid. I think because I just would see my mom in heels and would be like, oh my God, that's amazing. But yeah, so that's a little bit about me, and I'm sure we'll learn a little bit more, and I'm excited to hear what everyone else has to say.
Thanks, Eric. I'm Lindsay Pembroke. As I said, I'm on the board of directors for the New Haven Pride Center, as well as Hartford PFLAG. I'm an administrator with the 17,000 person non-binary gender pride support group on Facebook. And I'm do a lot of things with support groups around the state as far as facilitation and attending myself. And I'm glad to be here. I'm an older non-binary person, and that's something we'll talk about in a little bit, because you don't see as many older non-binary people, and there's reasons for that, and we'll definitely a topic we want to hit. I'm married 30 years, so I came to understand that I was non-binary much later in life, so I've had to navigate not only my gender identity, but how that fits inside a relationship with a cisgender person that also identifies as heterosexual. I have 2 kids and have to navigate navigate that as well. And I'm also a Catholic, and there's another whole set of things that you need to navigate. Is what does this mean to my religious identity? I mean, for any of us, gender is only one aspect of our identity. It's not 100%, and we all have this intersectionality with our lives. If you've been watching some of the other panels we've had in the Pride Center this week, where we've been dealing with intersectionality with Black issues, with Latinx issues, with women's issues, it's where we're all more than just our LGBTQ identity, and that's an important part of all this. So here we are during Trans Week. So why are we talking non-binary? This Transgender Week. So I guess the first question for the panel is what makes someone transgender enough, or even further, I guess, going along with that, what makes someone non-binary enough? Who would like to start with that one? I see you smiling there, Ray. Would you like to?
I can go.
Go ahead, Eric.
I think what makes someone trans enough and what makes someone non-binary enough is because they say that that's who they are. And, there is a lot of pushback sometimes talking about being non-binary with binary trans people because we're not seen as trans enough. But, I went through a complete social transition. I have not gone through a medical transition, but for as long as I can remember, I had been searching and searching and searching for a way to fit in with cis gay males because that's who I thought I was for so long. And then as soon as I started meeting trans and non-binary people, I was like, oh my God, this fits. This feels like home. And it's a feeling that I've never felt before because it was a community that embraced me and I just understood them. And I, so yes, I definitely hold on to, I'm of trans experience and I'm non-binary, and yeah, I think you just have to respect people, and I respect the people that think we're not trans enough. I respect that, but I also demand that I be treated with validity and affirmation about my own identity.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, that makes sense, and that's you brought up an important point when it comes to identity. There's a lot of gatekeeping in the community, and we'll be talking about that in a little bit. But one of the most important things to do with when it comes to identity is if someone tells you who they are, accept that at face value for who they are. Don't question or interrogate them. You don't get a vote, and kind of listen to the other person and what their experience is, and try to understand what and relate to what they're telling you. What do you think on this, Chris?
I completely agree. The way somebody, is non-binary or trans enough is if they feel that way. And it's so important to realize that like gender doesn't have to be a static thing for people. Like somebody could feel like they're non-binary, but then realize like, no, I'm actually gender fluid. I'm something else. I'm agender. It's not something that can be, that you just are. It's something that can change. And for some people it doesn't. For some people, like, they very strongly identify with a certain a certain gender or gender identity, and that's totally fine too. What's not fine, I think, is negating somebody's experience and identity. Like you said, we have so many gatekeepers already. And it's like not just the doctors and healthcare professionals and like the state and, government and all of that. It's, people even, in communities who are like, well, are you just seeking attention? You aren't doing this transition thing or that transition thing. And, I just want to let people, I took a long time to come out. I knew I was not cis for a long time and had to, even like I was gatekeeping myself for quite some time. So I just want to tell people first, like, if you feel like you're not, if you feel like you're not cis, if you feel like, you're whatever your identity is, even if you don't have a name for it, that's another thing, right? Is like, we're lucky to have so many internet communities, but if you don't know what trans is or non-binary, hopefully you're learning because you're on this, you're watching the Pride Center and there's resources through the Pride Center and support groups. Your identity is valid, whatever you think it is. And that's so important. Nobody has to approve that. You are the only one who gets to say, this is what I am. And the people around you, if they're not hearing you, if they're not listening to you, you do whatever you're comfortable with to explain it, but you have no obligation to them to do so. Like, they need to accept you just as you are.
Thanks, Chris. I wanted to pick on one thing that you were talking about in there, where you were talking about identities changing. And I know, and I'll talk about this from my perspective, because I can't say that other people's identities don't change. But I know for me, I don't know that my identity has changed so much as my understanding of my identity has changed. And like for instance, I went through most of my life where everybody around me would have thought I was a cis male. I mean, I still felt exactly like I did now, but I didn't have the language for it or any of the tools to be able to begin to unravel and understand what that meant. And then when I finally, at almost age 50, finally said, I can't go on like this and I need to, I sought out a gender therapist, and I started learning all of these different concepts, like gender not just being male and female, and it being the spectrum, and that there were points in between that people could exist on. That was a mind blown moment for me. Or that gender wasn't tightly wound with sexuality. I said we were going to talk later on about older non-binary people, but when I was growing up, even if I could have gotten by my gender and said, okay, this is, I think there's a really strong possibility that I'm a binary woman, I never would have gotten by the sexuality aspect of that, because it would have been like, okay, I think I'm a woman, but I don't like men, and and for me that was always, you throw your hands up in the air. So all these things with identity, as we learn things, I'm not so sure if, at least for some people, that it's our identity that changes so much as our ability to express what that is. And that may change with our understanding. So when people tell you, for anybody out there, if someone tells you what their identity is and then they tell you it's something else later on, I mean, don't get frustrated. They're trusting you with who they are as best as they can describe it at that moment in time. And after that moment in time is gone and you're on to a new moment in time, that understanding could change, and be patient with it. Rey, did you have anything you would like to add on this?
Yes. Yes, thank you so much. Yeah, I 100% agree with what Eric, Chris, and Lindsay have been saying. I think also it's, the more I think about gender, honestly, the more confused I am, and I can't really pin it down. I 100% resonate with, we just have to believe folks, right? And we have to respect folks and acknowledge how folks identify. And acknowledge that, like Chris was saying, and like Lindsay was saying, but in a different sense, that it is a journey, right? And it's something that changes, whether it's your identity that changes or whether it's your understanding of your identity that changes. I think being trans enough, to be frank, that's still something that I worry about a lot. I even worried about it coming onto this panel. I'm an AFAB person. I present pretty feminine. My expression is pretty feminine. I don't look like what you would think a non-binary person looks like when you go on Instagram, right? Like you search for or look at non-binary hashtags and you see all of these like models who are like model type looking people who are like very skinny, very white, very androgynous looking, right? I have curves, I have breasts, and I don't really feel like I need to change that. And, so that's something that I grapple with. So I guess I just wanted to say, if you're in the audience and you're thinking, these people seem so sure, that that people doubt, right? And that's part of the journey. And I think that the reason why we are all having these issues with doubting, like how trans we are, or are we non-binary enough, are we trans enough, is because of this unmarked problem, right? The problem, which is that we have been made to fit within this hetero patriarchal idea of gender that is very rigid. And I think it just is important to be aware of when those scripts come up in your head and label them as such and say, okay, this is a way of thinking about gender that is very specific to Western contexts after the 1400s, and even then is something that is imposed by the state, right? Yeah, I could go on and on about this. My thoughts are sort of all over the place, but I just wanted to say that, if you're watching this and you're like, am I trans enough? You're not alone. You are trans enough. And yeah.
Thanks, Rey. Yeah, like we said at the beginning, we were going through the definitions. Transgender doesn't mean are you male or female. It is, do you or do you not fully identify with the gender you were assigned at birth? And if you don't fully identify with it, then that's you are able to take that label as a description for yourself if that's what you would like. It doesn't require any particular expression. It doesn't require anything medical. It doesn't require any outward reflection whatsoever. Your identity is who you are inside. I wanted to pick up on a theme that Ray had started talking about, and throw the question out there. Do you feel that society puts pressure on people to conform to a binary gender? Eric, I know you had a story on that.
Yeah. So when I came out, it was about a year ago, and I, had shared this with my family, and then I made a post on Facebook. And I remember going to some events around the Grand Marshal nomination thing, and then I saw some things on Facebook that people were saying about me, and people were like, "Oh, you're just doing this to stay relevant in like the movement." And I'm like, why would I create tension between me and my family? Why would I make myself a risk every time I walk out my front door? Why would I, literally risk my life to being my authentic self to be relevant in a movement? No, like that is so absurd, and it's traumatic for me. It was traumatic for me because it was an act of aggression, and it was an act of transphobia. And even from other non-binary people, it was like, it was just very strange. And, it just goes back to like, society has this idea of who you are, and then they put their ideas upon you. And it's like, I just want to live my life. Like, I don't have to be in the public eye at all. I just want to exist as a human and a person, and figure out my own gender identity journey, So that was an interesting like reaction as soon as I came out.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, that's tough, and I like that. Why would I risk it? This whole concept, this idea of choice, is an interesting one. I mean, people don't choose to be who they are. I mean, for people out there trying to wrap their head around this, I mean, did you choose to be right-handed or left-handed? Or did at some point in your life you just started using your right hand and that felt natural and good? If you were right-handed and when you did it with your left, it just didn't quite feel the same. Or if you were, born left-handed and, people were trying to tell you how to do things right-handed and that didn't feel right until you finally figured out that, using your left hand was natural. Gender's no different than that. It's just us figuring out what feels comfortable, and when we hit on that, we know it. We don't need somebody else to tell it. I mean, somebody couldn't look at you and say, "Hey, you're using the wrong hand," just from looking at you. And it's hard to look at us and tell us how we should feel about our gender. I see we had a question from the audience, or a statement from the audience, that medical transition can also be part of non-binary experiences. And yes, this is true. I think the important part about identity, and we'll talk about this. May as well talk about it right now. The important about identity is it does not require anyone to do anything specific medically, or one to wear any particular article of clothing, or pierce any particular piece of the body, or anything like that. But people can, and they do. It's how they want to express themselves. Anybody want to talk about the medical aspect of being non-binary?
Yeah, I can talk briefly about that. I think it's so important. Some non-binary people have some medical transition, do some sort of medical transition. Some people don't, and like that's totally valid. Just like some trans people, like binary trans people, do some sort of medical transition, or none, or as much as they like possibly can, or decide, like pick and choose what is going to make me feel comfortable with myself. And that, as a non-binary person, is like also what I'm, what I'm doing. I'm a MAB person. I, am taking, taking hormones and taking, estrogen at a low level. And like, that was my decision. Like, that's, where I am right now. And it actually took a long time to get back, to get there, right? To like assess, like, do I want to do that? It was never like, oh, you can't because you're non-binary, or you have to because you're trans feminine. And that was so important, I think, for folks to know, right? There are so many different things, like there's facial masculinization or feminization surgeries. There's, I guess people would say they're technically cosmetic things like hair, like hair removal or things like that, that can actually be like really important to a person in their transition to make their appearance feel like more like who they identify as. And I also want to go back to something Rey said. It really struck me really quickly. They said something, about like being on Instagram and seeing like non-binariness like represented by androgyny. And it's like, no, that's not what it has to be. And if you are an androgynous non-binary person, like that's awesome. And like, if that's who you are, that's great. But like, that's not who you have to be. I mean, I think look at the four of us here, right? We are all like valid non-binary people in like our own rights, and anyone watching, so are you.
If there's a problem with me, it's not my gender. So when it comes to that choice for people, the choice is not to be a particular gender. It's to accept the fact that they are who they are. Some people will spend their entire lives denying it or trying to fight it or find a way around it or figure it's a phase and maybe it's going to pass. And at some point you choose to just look yourself in the mirror and say, this is who I am, this is how I feel, and I'm choosing to be honest with myself about that. That's the only choice that's involved. I know from my non-binary group that I administer, there's people use medical transition or pieces of medical transition for a lot of different things. There are, someone may go on, testosterone. They may choose to, a transmasculine person. They may only want, go on a small amount. Sometimes they will totally masculinize. It's, that way that people want to be the best version of them is going to differ person to person. One person might microdose and just want to try to get a deeper voice or a little bit of facial hair, and you have no control over these things, but it's things people explore. And I always liken anything when it comes to expression. I kind of liken going to the optometrist, where you go to the optometrist and he puts in or she puts in some glass lenses, and they say, does this look better or does this look better? And they keep on flipping them back and forth and changing out the lenses, and your experience, either you see things clearer or you don't. And you keep on going back and forth with expression to try to figure out what feels good and what feels right and what looks like you. And the things that aren't, you kind of set off to the side until you get where you want to go. So that's medical stuff. I mean, you have people that have very bad dysphoria, when they have menstruation. If you're a transmasculine person and you have to have a period every month, that can be a really, really grating thing, like fingernails on a chalkboard. So there's just some of these things are tools in a toolbox. They're not the identity themselves, but they're how people choose to react to their identity. I always look at transition not so much as being a goal, and feel free to chime in on this one too. And I know we want to go back to the societal topic we were talking about, but also feel free to chime in this one. Transition, especially with non-binary people, isn't necessarily a destination. People don't say, I'm at point A and I want to get to point B, and I'm going to do A, B, C, D, and E to get there. We try things one at a time, and if it feels good, we keep it, and if it doesn't feel good, then we don't keep it. And when you look back a year or two later and you look back where you are and where you were, you say, oh, I've made all these changes, and they were small, so I didn't notice them, but you've done a transition. Transition in that case is more of an outcome than it is a destination. And I think it's always healthier to look at it like that and to not put expectations on people based on your own gender filter as to what you think they're going to do. And and say, so when are you going to get the surgery, or when are you going to get on hormones? And it's just like I said, it's an outcome, and it's very personal. So going back to we were talking about society putting pressure on people to conform to a binary gender. You had something you wanted to weigh in on that, Ray?
Yeah, I think what Eric was saying about the threat of violence is very valid and very real. And I also wanted to add that there are less quote unquote overt and less, overt ways that our social institutions can function such that they do harm and violence on non-binary folks and on trans folks, right? So in addition to physical violence and the threat of physical and bodily harm, there are also ways that institutions police that gender binary and police that heteropatriarchal script and way of thinking about gender. Someone in the audience was asking about how to navigate gender labels on driver's licenses and birth certificates, etc. These are all symptoms of how institutions are designed for people who are gender binary, right? And in addition, in interpersonal interactions, there are ways that folks police each other. What Lindsay and Chris were talking about with regards to expectations to go through medical transitions or not to go through medical transitions are ways that, we police how people experience their gender and reinforce these ideas that there is a valid way to be a person who is non-binary or trans in the world, right? Like in these little interactions, these things are reproduced and reinforced. So there are so many levels to this way that society sort of shapes our ideas of who we are, and also polices essentially our capacity to fully explore our identities, right?
Yeah. Thank you, Ray. And you alluded to the question we had in here too about navigating the driver's licenses and birth certificates and stuff like that. I mean, it's not really it's more of a reflection of our identity, but it's all stuff that we do to validate our identities. The state of Connecticut in January 28th of this past year finally made it so that we could get a non-binary X gender marker on our license. It's not available all the way on through. I mean, it has to be available in a state you were born in to get it on your birth certificate. Some states have it, some states don't. It's not available necessarily. It's on the passport. Definitely not available yet. On a national level. And depending on what you're trying to do and how you're trying to navigate through society, sometimes you have hiccups and problems if those things don't all line up. Like I can tell you, I went in to give, I went and got my ex-driver's license at AAA in Manchester the day that it came out. Me and my friend AJ, we met up for breakfast, and then we drove over for the opening of the AAA. And AJ, we found out after the fact that Dr. AJ Eckert at Anchor Health was the first person in the state of Connecticut to get the X gender marker when that came out. And I went right after them. So when I tell the story, I say I'm number 2. And I have plenty of people around me that would agree with that. So, it's there, and you can take advantage of those things if you do change your actual name, like to do the label of the gender marker, you just need to self-identify. If you want to do things like change a name to go along with it, that you'll need to go through court and get renamed, and then you'll have to push that all the way on through to Social Security and everywhere else that you want to go with that. We have a case manager at the New Haven Pride Center, and there are resources online at PFLAG and a couple of other organizations in the state of Connecticut. So that information is definitely out there. All right, where do we want to go next? Let's talk about so I had the question about bathrooms, going off the society thing, and yeah, you know what? Everybody's all about the bathrooms. So, how does what in your experience? How's that feel when, as a non-binary person, and you're looking at a bathroom and you have a choice in a lot of places of just male or just female?
For me, it's like a struggle that I never thought I would be in. But it goes back to like what Rey was saying about societal pressure to fit into a binary. And then for me, it goes to, okay, I have to look as cis passing as possible. But like, what does that even mean? Like that's like not really a thing that I can wrap my head around. But I remember I was on a trip, or every time I'm in public and I have to use the restroom, I just kind of stand there going, okay, where will I not get attacked? Where will I have the least amount of confrontation? And it really has to go to how I'm presenting that day. And I hate that. Like, I just want to go and use the restroom and go about my day. But other people's, the pressure from other people, and then like safety again, all of that comes into play every time I just want to use the restroom. And I think that, going through 2016 in Texas and the bathroom bill, I showed up to help with that fight as a cis gay male, but now as a non-binary trans femme person, like it hits so close to home, and it's terrifying sometimes.
Anybody else? Thanks, Eric. Anybody else want to weigh in on that one?
Sure, I can weigh in. Yeah, I definitely feel very weird about going to the bathroom, honestly. It makes me very anxious, like the idea of it sometimes. And I'm not experiencing this as much now because of the pandemic, and I'm just in my house, and the bathroom here is gender inclusive. Anyone can use it. When I've been outside at a bar or a restaurant, I'm like, well, can I hold my pee until I get home? Can I do it? Because I just don't want to have to deal with my feelings using the bathroom. And times where I've used the bathroom for women, I contend with these feelings of like, it just doesn't feel good. I don't really know how to articulate it. But then sometimes I try to subvert that, and I'm like, okay, it's a single stall, men and women. I'm going to use the men's bathroom because it's empty, right? And I go and I always, or a staff member inevitably when they see me will say, hey, do you know that's the men's bathroom? And I'm like, yes. So it feels, it's very tough. It's a source of lots of anxiety for me, less about my safety. And I think that has to do with the fact that we think that trans people, especially people who are AMAB, are these like sexual predators, right? And we always use sexual assault and harassment as a foil for so many things, which Chris and I have talked about before. But in this instance, it also comes up, like we have all of these moral panics about like, quote unquote men masquerading as quote unquote women and the danger they could pose. So I think the fact that I am AFAB and look very feminine makes me, at least, and not saying that everyone who is like me doesn't feel scared, but I'm not so much concerned about my safety, but rather the things I deal with are internal. When confronted with people who say you can't actually use that bathroom because you're not a man. So yeah.
And they try to tackle you walking in the door. Yeah, I know for me, I'm more situational. If I'm presenting femme, then maybe I'll use the women's room, but otherwise, just out of convenience, I would use the men's room. I prefer if it's not labeled at all. And like you were referring to, I mean, if I don't feel safe, it doesn't matter whether, which one I would use. If I don't feel safe, I'm probably not going to go in either. And for kids, especially for kids that have to deal with that in a high school atmosphere or a junior high school atmosphere, to be forced to, go into one bathroom or another, and then with some of the harassment that goes on, some of these kids are afraid to go to the bathroom, and they'll end up holding it for an entire school day, and then that will result over long term in UTIs and other health problems that get created from this. So this is very much a health and medical issue. And I don't even know where this whole thing materialized as an issue to begin with. I do know where it materialized as an issue. People want to talk about transphobia and, NB-phobia. NB is short for non-binary. Some people use. There was a TV show in the 90s called Ally McBeal, and they had joint bathrooms in there. They were unisex bathrooms, and storyline wise, you had men and women using the same bathroom. Nobody blinked an eye. You didn't see a single article about the people in this law firm how they were going to get raped by the men that were in there. It was, people may have raised an eyebrow as a novel idea, but nobody freaked out about it. It wasn't until somebody wanted to combat against trans people and non-binary people and make life uncomfortable and push us out onto the margins of society that any of this bathroom stuff became an issue. And that it's, anytime you see the bathroom issue, that's all it is, because you had an entire TV show have a very long and successful run where nobody blinked an eye. So you need to, we got to look stuff like that in the eye and call it out for what it is, and call those issues out for what they are. So how on earth did we get in a non-binary panel and get this deep in and not talk about pronouns? So why don't we talk about pronouns? Why do people find pronouns so important, do you think? Anybody want to chime in on pronouns and identity? And how about you, Ray? You want to start us off on this one?
Sure, I can, but Chris hasn't talked in a while, so I want to make sure that they also have space. Are you okay with that, Chris, or do you have something to
Yeah,
say?
I mean, Ray, we've talked about this before, and you definitely need to speak on it. But yeah, I mean, briefly, I think people being so insistent on not claiming to not understand they them as pronouns, it just reinforces the binary and oh, what role do you fit in society? Are you a man or are you a woman? And as a non-binary person, well, neither. So, and that's okay. That's who I am. That's just, I don't fit into either of those societal roles. When I started using they, them as pronouns, I actually said in my coming out post on conversations, it's if you've called me, if you've used he, him for the last 30 odd years, I'm not going to be mad at you for slipping up. I'm not going to be mad at you for whatever. Yes, it can be I get it. It can be difficult. That's, just muscle memory, but put a little effort in, it's not going to harm you. It's not going to change your identity to refer to somebody with the pronouns that they use. I've just never understood this like pseudo-grammatical argument, which is really just like a transphobic argument about using they them as pronouns. And you know, people like some people use they them and he him, or they them and she her, and or another combination, and it is like, and that's fine. You know, use the pronouns that like somebody's comfortable with. You know, just like if somebody changes their name, the way I look at it, somebody changes their last, like gets married and changes their last name, like everyone immediately just like adapts to it, right? So like, why is it any different with a name change or pronouns?
Absolutely agreed. And definitely important to point out when we're getting to those misconceptions on non-binary people. All non-binary people don't necessarily use they, them as a pronoun. Some people, you know, may use he, she, you know, or may he, him. Some may use she, her. Some may use, you know, she, they, he, they, you know, any combination. And then there's the neo pronouns that some people may use, which are just pronouns that are not some of the standard ones. Ray, you want to weigh in on that?
Sure, yeah. I think that some of the difficulty that people have with pronouns comes from the fact that they think it's a linguistic thing, right? Like they are concerned with performing a person who is PC and who gets things right. And, you know, it's not all that. Some of it can also be well-intentioned, of course, and folks genuinely do care. But I think that until people understand that it's more than a linguistic shift, that it's a shift in how you think about a person and how you think about gender, and you really need to do that work to shift how you think about gender, you will continue to slip up, right? And so the reason why we can do things like, or it's much easier to respect someone's new last name when they get married, say they change their last name, is because that status shift and that role shift is so normalized for us, right? Whereas our rigid notions of gender make it very difficult for us to see outside of this binary, and to see outside of this cisnormativity. So I think that when folks, you know, if anyone here is watching, and there are some parents, so that's super cool. If you're a cis person and you are very close with, related to, love someone who is non-binary, trans, I think, and you're having trouble with their pronouns, I think that it's probably because it entails a larger shift in the way you think about gender and honestly the world. And it's work. It takes a lot of work. It's not just memorization. And yeah, I think that, so I want to say that pronouns are not, also that pronouns are not important for everyone, in addition to them being very diverse outside of they, them, she, her, and he, him. They are important to some, but I think for me personally, they are important because so much of how we code people and how we gender people is related to the pronouns that we use for them, right? And at least that's the case in English. So in Tagalog, which is the other language I speak, which is one of the many hundreds of languages spoken in the Philippines, we actually don't have a gendered he, she. We don't have a gendered third person, singular or plural at all. It's just siya, which is just they. It roughly translates to they. So sometimes, you know, my mom will mix up pronouns still, no matter the person's gender, because she's not used to thinking of gender linguistically in those terms, because it just doesn't exist in her native language. So I think very much it depends on your context as well. So in English, it can matter a lot, because the pronouns that people use for you are really a marker of how they see your gender. And I think that that's why it's important to me.
Thanks, Ray. And we had a comment that said that 100,000% agreeing with you, Ray. And they made the point, if you stop misgendering a person mentally, you'll stop misgendering them with your mouth. And that is truer statement not been uttered. You really need to, whether it's a trans person or a non-binary person, you really need to visualize that person as they are, with the gender that they are, and not the gender that you're trying to perceive them as. Take off your own gender filter and just look at that other person and see them. And you will do a lot. If you're having issues with pronouns, you'll be doing a significantly better job. And if we have parents out in the audience, pronouns are important if you have non-binary kids. I mean, kids don't have a lot of control over much in their life, but they have control over their identity and who they are, and their pronouns aren't preferred. They're not optional. If they tell you what their pronouns are, that's a sign of respect to just use their pronouns. That validates them and will make them feel like they do have some control over how the world is seeing them and feel seen. And that identity is so important. Let's see. We were talking about the gender markers before, and I wanted to throw out a question from a legislative standpoint. What would you rather see if you were given a choice? Having the addition of a third gender marker universally available, or completely eliminating gender markers on IDs altogether? And just chime in, whoever wants to run with that.
For me, I would love to have a non-binary or I think that they do an X for non-binary people on my license, because I think it would serve as a marker to, if I would get pulled over for a traffic stop or something, it would explain maybe my appearance to the cop, and they might treat me differently because of that, and not ask a whole bunch of invasive questions and automatically start looking for other things that I might, it would be a safety net for me. I think people are so obsessed with putting people in boxes, and I think that's one reason that pronouns are hard for people, just to kind of circle back to what we were talking about. But yeah, that's what I have to say on the gender marker.
Thank you.
I would love to see gender markers just disappear overall. For me, our own recognition of our gender and the recognition of those around us is really important. But the state, it frustrates me so much that we have to fight all of these things just to get another option to tick, right? And there's no need for it, frankly. There just isn't a need for these markers. And that's not to diss anyone who wants them to be able to feel validated. I'm going to get the X marker myself when I feel when it's safe to go to the DMV. And I know you can do it online, but it's a whole thing. But I'd like to get rid of them entirely. And also so I work in tech, right? And a lot of the forums that are online, it's are you male or female? Or are you male, female, or transgender is my favorite one. Male, female, or transgender. And I'm you don't need this information. And Google and Facebook, in their tracking, they try to assess whether you are male or female. They guess. And they use that for ad targeting, right? That should not be a thing. The only people who need to know, first of all, the gender is your identity. The only people who need to know what's up with your hormone levels or what's in your pants is you and your doctor, right? And not for everything either, because there's trans broken arm syndrome, right? Where everything that happens to you medically is because you're trans somehow, and I hate that. And I know people who have dealt with that, but they use it as a substitute for sex, and even on sex there's a spectrum. It's not just male and female. There are intersex people and so many other things. And yeah, I mean, I would love to just get rid of it entirely.
I think there's arguments on both sides of that, and I'm glad we're getting to talk about some of those. Ray, you had a comment.
Yeah, I think that personally, I would like to get rid of them entirely. But I do feel ambivalent just because there are binary trans folks who feel so validated by it. I don't have a clear answer, but I do think that it's interesting how this, for me, also connects to issues having to do with whether or not we can see LGBTQ equality or we can see justice for our communities through institutional means, right? So there's an argument also that, you know, if we are, I don't want to say co-opted, and I'm not trying to, okay, I'll start over. So like the very obvious example of this is marriage, right? There is a way that the state has co-opted the LGBTQ community through marriage, and the critique is that there's lots of critiques, but the critique is that it basically makes it so that alternative ways of being with people having relationships, etc., sexual and or romantic or platonic or any kind of combination gets it gets further marginalized, right? And okay, full disclosure, I'm married, so I'm not trying to say that queer people shouldn't get married, that non-binary people, trans people should not get married. But questions like this, when we are seeking solutions from within institutions, are always interesting to me. I'm not saying we shouldn't. I'm not saying that it's not a worthwhile project, that it's not a project, that it's a project that won't make people feel more valid and more safe. But it does give me pause. Our strategies about seeking justice through, bourgeois institutions.
Well, thanks, Ray. I wanted to, we're almost done with our time, so I do want to pick up on a couple of things. Wanted to at least make a mention of. Chris, you were talked about having on the IDs being asked if someone was male, female, or transgender, and yeah, that's, I mean, in that instance, transgender is an identity. It's not really a sex. Transgender people are male or female or non-binary. Though, you could ask stuff like that, but to kind of set up your question as if a transgender person isn't male or female is kind of offensive as hell, and people shouldn't do that. But going along with that, one thing we definitely wanted to at least make mention of on this panel is the question we get sometimes: are intersex people non-binary? And just from a quick hit standpoint, intersex fits in this part of the discussion too. I mean, intersex, that is a sex. You are male, you're female, or you're intersex. And wanted to make mention of the fact, because especially this is an issue that's come up in Connecticut, didn't go through in the session before last legislatively, but hopefully will in the next one. Choices are made for intersex people at birth that as to what sex they're going to be by a doctor. They'll take out the ruler and they'll measure if there's anything there, and if if whatever appendage is there, if it's over a certain size, they'll go for male. If it's under a certain size, they'll go for female, and they will perform what is essentially a non-consensual surgery. And then later on in life, an intersex person may gravitate toward a gender that is not the gender that the doctor decided for them, and that causes issues. Plus, when you're operating on an infant on something like that, where you don't really need to do an operation, where there's no medical reason to, they can develop some issues later on in life that you need urological intervention to fix. So that stuff is all important. So keep an eye on that from a legislative standpoint. And I guess to answer the question about intersex people being non-binary, some are, some aren't. If they say they're non-binary and they identify that way, then they are, and if they don't, then that's fine too. Let's see. if we wanted to get to, we haven't talked about dysphoria and euphoria. So I want to throw those two terms out there and ask you how those have impacted you in terms, in coming to terms with your gender identity. Who wants to pick that one up? Do you want to take that one, Eric, to start?
Sure. Personally, I've not had much dysphoria, but I've had a lot of euphoria. When I put on like a face and my makeup and I'm wearing something that's really femme, it's like I've put on armor or something. I don't know. It feels so, I feel so like radiant and beautiful and glam, and like I just love it. And I'm not wearing them now, but I usually wear lashes, and like it makes me feel like I can do anything. And any of the stuff people throw at me and say at me in public, I can handle because I'm feeling powerful and empowered. And yeah, it's so funny how something so small can make someone feel so great.
Thanks, Eric. And Chris?
Yeah, I think somewhat similarly, I didn't experience dysphoria until I experienced euphoria. Or like I didn't recognize that that's what I was feeling. Like people who know me might know, like I used to have like short hair and a giant beard when I was like, before I came out, and like, I don't know, that might have been a whole lot of different things, right? But like as soon as I like was like, I can present the way I feel good presenting this way with my face, with the heels, with the bag. And then I was like, oh, if I'm not doing it, I'm really uncomfortable with my body right now. But I want to say too, like, and this is like a theme here, dysphoria is not a requirement for being trans or being non-binary. Like, do not let anyone tell you that, and do not feel that. But yeah, it's been interesting. I have a lot of friends who are trans, who are non-binary, who were like, deal with dysphoria. And I just, yeah, having gone from not having dysphoria to experiencing euphoria and then having dysphoria has been a really interesting path.
I love that, Chris. I never thought about it that way, but like, yeah, maybe I do have dysphoria because of my euphoria. Because when I'm like presenting completely masked, it feels very weird. Like, it's like I'm not like all there. I don't know.
It's true, and for me, I kind of always think of it'd probably be a dumb example, but I think of champagne. And if anybody's ever had a good bottle of champagne and a bad bottle of champagne, I mean, in my youth we used to love that Andre champagne, which is like your bottom tier champagne, and you drink it and it's perfectly fine, and you don't notice that there's any problem with it or anything else like that. And it's a perfectly passable one you can get in bulk. And then if you ever have an opportunity to have something like a Corbel, and again, it also tastes like a really nice champagne. It's probably the next rung up, and it tastes fine. And again, you don't really notice much until you have a glass of Corbel, and then you go try to have a glass of the Andre, and then you can very much tell that the experience with the Corbel was a much better experience than it was with the Andre. It's just it's the way it tastes. It just it's like that experience for me. It's like that experience of not really understanding that you were experiencing a lifetime of dysphoria until you really start to understand what euphoria is. Then you can go look back through that lens and see what that's really like. So yeah, that's totally relatable.
Yeah.
Ray?
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
yeah.
You.
I was just gonna say, it's really interesting because like so much of our discussion, and also personally how I experience dysphoria and euphoria, like have to do with expression, like gender expression, and it's that link is so interesting. I don't know if interesting is the right word, but I don't mean to trivialize it, but that link is certainly interesting. I experience, I think, very little dysphoria, although people are always telling me when I talk to them and talk about something that certain things I'm talking about can actually be framed or thought about as like an instance of dysphoria. I think we have like a lots of normative notions of what counts as dysphoria too. So it can perhaps be hard to recognize when people are experiencing dysphoria. But for me, the most, I guess, like overt and explicit to me time that I experience dysphoria is again related to expression, which is when I have to wear a dress or something, because it makes me, again, I'm an AFAB person, so it makes me feel like I'm sort of going into that hole of being who I'm not. And also, it makes it such that folks misgender me more often. It's really interesting to see how my expression prompts folks to ask about my pronouns, and certain types of expression do not prompt folks to ask about my pronouns. I wish that were not the case. And again, this is, this line of discussion is fraught. There's lots of debates between the non-binary and the trans community about pronouns, or asking about pronouns, about dysphoria, etc., and the ways they are related. But yeah, I don't know. I would say that I experience dysphoria. I also still experience euphoria, but so much of it is still something I'm working out.
Well said. And thank you for sharing that. All right, so we're getting near the end of our time, so I want to finish up with a couple of things, and then we'll give you some closing comments, and then Patrick with a message for you. So I want to talk quickly, briefly about where are all the older non-binary people. And we said we'd talk about that toward the beginning, and I wanted to make sure I come back and pull that thread closed. And I made reference to my own experience when I was growing up in the late 70s, early 80s. Gender was male or female, and it was tightly tied to sexuality. That was the signals that society gave across. We didn't have things like the internet back then. So you pretty much, if your only source of information was the people that were around you and the messages that you would get from the culture that was around you and the media that was around you, you didn't even really see a lot of representation of trans people, never mind non-binary people living some identity that wasn't male or female. So a lot of people that grew up in that time period or before that time period, and that's not to say that there weren't some that did figure it all out and find some way to live. I mean, I've seen some references to, commune type situations where people kind of isolated themselves from culture and lived like that. It wasn't really in the public consciousness when that happened. So people would either decide that maybe they were binary trans and they would do a binary transition and they would try to go down that route. Or if they were somebody like me, they might just at some point just kind of throw their hands up in the air and say, I can't figure this out. And, you can't sit inside of four walls for your entire life. You have to find some way to make a life for yourself. So, I know for me, I would conform to the label, the gender that I was raised as, and try to figure out what the rules were for working that gender as best I could from looking at people around me that, I perceived as male, and, figure out how to do a life. I've run into in now, since I've been dealing with my gender identity the last 6.5 years. Boy, that seems like a really long time now. But when you think of over the course of a lifetime, it's really not. I've run into a lot of trans people who say, if I knew about non-binary back then when I transitioned, I think I may have just identified as non-binary and gone on that way. So youth now, and you see it all over the place, and people try to say, oh, it's a transtrender is a word that some people have kind of thrown around there to belittle the non-binary experience with some of our youth today, but really they've been on the cutting edge. And one of the things the internet brought was for people in groups like us, because we're not going to say that the majority of the population feels like we do. We're a small segment of the population, and you could go your whole life without running into other non-binary people unless they shared with you what they were experiencing. The internet allowed a lot of our youth to interact with each other and find there were people out there that shared their same experiences and that felt like they did. And language is always evolving, and the scientific knowledge on gender has evolved, and our understanding of gender has evolved. And as all those things have happened in the last 10 years or so, you've seen an escalation, because people are not only knowing that there are other people out there like them, not only identifying, but at one point the world had started to feel a little safer, and people felt a little more comfortable sharing who they were with the world. And we kind of owe that to kids that are in the spot now to try to make the world around us as safe and as beautiful a place as we can for them to be able to fully express who they are and be who they are and walk through the world and have access to employment and have access to housing and have access to love and all of the things that we want for ourselves and we want for our own kids. So it's it's kind of cool, but that, to me, that's why I don't think you see as many older non-binary people. And for me, if it wasn't for some things that happened later on in my life that made me, kind of forced me into confronting my gender and having to deal with it, I would have kept on going on what I was doing. And I always kind of describe that experience to people kind of like the Wizard of Oz, where at the beginning of Wizard of Oz, the world is gray and it's black and white and gray, but Dorothy has family around her and her dog, and she's loved, and she has the existence that she has. And then she steps out of that house, and all of the colors and the songs and the rainbows, and it's just an entirely different world. And Dorothy going from Oz and then back to Kansas, where it's just black and white. You got to imagine that her life is never going to be the same again, and it's never going to feel and look the same again. And for me, that's kind of what it was like finally identifying my gender. I would have been fine keeping on going like I was if I hadn't been forced to really confront it. And I'm glad after a lifetime that I finally understand who I am. But it's the Wizard of Oz. So with that, I think I want to kind of go around and we'll give everybody an opportunity to do a closing statement. Kind of where you are with non-binary and the panel and what we want to leave the world with, and then we'll move into closing off our panel. So we're gonna go Ray, then Eric, then Chris, if that's okay. But feel free to jump in if you want to go.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for watching the panel, and thank you for inviting me to this panel in the first place. It's a great opportunity. There's so much that I didn't get to talk about that I wanted to say, but I guess I just wanted to leave folks with this. One of the ways that I have felt, or I have found to help me navigate my feelings of imposter syndrome and also ambiguity about my gender identity, which is completely understandable because we have no scripts for it. That's also another thing I wanted to say, is that so much of our confusion and anxiety about fitting has to do with the fact that there are no models for non-binary people, right? So it's not just you, it's not just an individual thing, it's very much a social thing. But personally, if you like reading, I've found that reading about the ways that our notions of binary gender are very much like a settler colonial capitalist invention in the US, like the way we think about binary genders now, has been really, really helpful. And also reading about how For centuries, there have been human beings who do not identify with the gender binary, or their societies don't even have our version of the gender binary. And there are still those people today. Has been super helpful for me in just, reminding myself that, again, like, these awful feelings I'm feeling, I'm not alone. And they are because I'm coming up against a social structure that doesn't recognize my existence in the first place, right? So that's really important. The other thing I wanted to touch on that I didn't get to touch on was about mental health and the intersection of these thoughts, like questioning, anxiety, and mental health. So I'm a person with obsessive compulsive disorder, and I don't know the answer to this, but sometimes when we were talking about how do you know if you're trans enough, or what is trans enough, I wanted to acknowledge and point out that that can be triggering for obsessive people with OCD. Not to say that the question is not worth asking, but just that if you have OCD and you're watching this, and that line of questioning made you feel like, oh no, but like, how do I know? How do I really feel? You're not alone. I go through that loop, and that way of thinking about transness and non-binariness, and being trans enough or non-binary enough, definitely does not feel the same for me as it does, I think, for folks without OCD. So I think we have to find different ways of validating gender identities that keep in mind that people with certain mental health issues need to think about it a different way. So yeah, that's what I'd like to leave you with. I guess the gist of both of those together is that, we all live intersectional lives, and it's important to attend to the ways that these different intersections, these different positionalities condition our experiences. And if you don't fit dominant narratives, even within the non-binary community, you're not alone. And it's the only reason why is because there are always standpoints that are more privileged than others.
Thanks, Ray. Eric, any closing comments?
Yeah. I think if you're someone who is questioning their gender identity, or if you've already figured out where you are in your journey, one thing that I found really helpful is using Facebook as a way to find community. I am a part of a number of private Facebook groups that are trans-centered or non-binary centered. And I just, being able to look at my social media feed and just see this amazing influx of beautiful genders and people and humans is so affirming and empowering for me. Especially in the world we live in today, where we're, bombarded with this horrible news all the time. But, I think also just believing in yourself and believing in your own journey, and realizing that there doesn't have to be an endpoint. You don't have to give anyone an answer. You don't even have to have an answer. It's such a beautiful thing to be able to explore and to figure out who you are.
Thanks, Eric. Great note. And then Chris, and please do plug Trans Lifeline.
Well, I just want to say, we talk a lot about different paths and journeys and exploration, and it's okay to be at a different place in your journey, to be standing at the beginning and saying, like, do I even want to take this step? I'm scared. It's okay to say, all right, I'm going to take a couple steps, and then I have to step back, or I'm just going to stop here for a bit and rest and see where I am. It's okay to say, you know what, I'm on this journey myself and I'm figuring it out. And it's okay to say, you know what, I need to talk to somebody about it. It's okay to do all of those things. I saw there was somebody in the chat who, said that they're just navigating this themselves and they're just coming out, and like, you have a huge community here at the Pride Center, at Trans Lifeline, at all of the other groups that are involved here. And, people are here for you. And you don't have to agree. I think we've seen it today, right? Everyone's experience has been different, like, and that's okay. Like, we're not disagreeing with each other. We're having different lived experiences, and yours might match somebody's, or it might not. And the one thing I want to say to folks who are here because they're supporting somebody in their life or just curious about what being non-binary is, you know, your role is to, at the very least, don't bother that person. Like, let people be. If you're in, a relationship with somebody, your teacher, doctor, whatever, friend, parent, partner, then like, be supportive. Be supportive of that person. Let them tell you what your role is. If you're, just walking down the grocery store aisle, then just like mind your own business, honestly. Like, just straight up, like, it's, we're people, and we have a lot more to our lives than just our gender. And I think that's something too that we didn't really touch on a whole lot, but I think there's something, we should, keep that in mind too. Like, we're humans.
Unless we haven't had our first cup of coffee of the day, then all bets are off. All right. And so I'm Lindsay, and I wanted to thank you all out there for attending our panel today. I hope you've walked away with a little more knowledge and understanding of non-binary people. I know for sure some of the things we wanted to leave you with today that we talked about was there is not one look for non-binary people. There's not one transition path for non-binary people, and some don't do any transition at all. There's no requirement for being on hormones, although some non-binary people choose to do that. There's just not one way to be non-binary. As we started this panel off talking about a collection of identities, there are just a lot of different ways to experience gender that aren't through the lens of male or female, or solely male or female, as some of you out there perceive your gender. It's just a different way of experiencing gender. Pronouns do not equal gender. You'll find non-binary people that use they, them, and many that don't. Non-binary isn't new. It's been around for a really long time. There were, as Ray made reference to, a bunch of cultures that existed before Western European culture hit the U.S. And they experienced gender outside of male and female too. The only thing that's different about non-binary is that the language and the understanding of it are what seems new, but the identities and the way of feeling have always been there. So thank you all for attending. I want to turn things over to Patrick. We have all kinds of awesome things going on at the Pride Center for those that have been watching our evolution over the past couple of years. We were always a volunteer organization. Then we hired Patrick as our executive director. And in the time Patrick's been on board, we've just grown. Over the last year, we've added we went out in the community and looked at programming that we needed, and we added a program officer for women, and we added a program officer for youth. We added a program officer for Latinx, and we added our latest is Elliot, who arranged our Transgender Awareness Week this week as our transgender, non-binary, and intersex program officer. All these different all this programming has been brought to you by the New Haven Pride Center, and none of it's possible without your donations and all of your support, both financially and as volunteers. So thank you all so much for supporting us for all of these different things. I'm going to let Patrick tell you a little bit more about a matching grant we have going.
Sure, and I want to echo Lindsay. A huge thank you to Elliot and congratulations. We only hired him like a month ago, not even, and he pulled off an amazing Trans Awareness Week. And thank you to all the partners and speakers and everybody who's made this week amazing. Particularly want to thank everyone on this panel. I know many of you or know who you are if I don't know you personally. And I really appreciate you all spending the time. And really, you know, I think one of the beautiful things about our community is there's always more to learn about each other and understand about each other and recognize in each other. And I hope that folks watching today who may have that question of, I don't understand non-binary, walked away feeling a little bit like they have some more information. I do, as Lindsay mentioned, want to just recognize that the center was recently awarded by a national matching grant of $25,000. We were one of 8 organizations nationally to receive this grant. We're super honored, and we need your help to raise the match. So if you have an extra $1, $2, or $5, now is the time to make it $2, $4, or $10 with this match. So if you go to newhavenpridecenter.org/match to make a donation, your donation will automatically be doubled. And go to support all of the expansion of our programming that we're trying to do to continue to serve the broader community and make sure that everyone in our community has a safe place and home to call their own. Again, Trans Awareness Week has been going on all week, and we have the rest of today and tomorrow left. If you're still looking to participate, there's the information right there. For anybody who is local, I do want to say that we will be on the New Haven Green tomorrow for Trans Day of Remembrance, and that will be beginning at 5:30. But great news for you, if you're not local, you can still participate because we will be streaming the entire event virtually. So stay safe, stay healthy, and Lindsay, I'm going to give it to you for the last comment.
Well, thank you very much, Patrick. Again, for everybody out in the audience, thank you all for watching. Thank you all for being here. We couldn't see all of your comments as you're on, so if there's anybody out there, I'd really love to recognize you, but I can't see who's out there. But we know you're there, and we appreciate that. This will be up on YouTube and Facebook Live, posting at some point in the next day, as soon as the system's done processing it. So please do seek this out and share the link with people around you that would like to know more and would like to experience what you just experienced. Talk to you all soon.